Hello, everybody. It's John Browning on the Building Your Life podcast. And today I have Joni with me. And it's Joni and John. So we're going to have a little bit of fun today, I think, because what Joni does is she talks about relationship and communications, and she's a relationship and communications coach. She helps individuals and companies in high stress conflict. I know nobody on this podcast has ever had or experienced anything with that, and she helps them find common vocabulary, which I find interesting, that term, which is very important, and helps you to work through the issues that build and strengthen your relationships, as opposed to maybe just abandoning all hope and burning that bridge. And I think when we really think that through, that's really what we want, right? We want to maintain the relationship, but sometimes we're unable to communicate anymore, and we need somebody to come in and really talk us through maybe how to do that, be an independent third party, which I often talk about here on the Building Your Life podcast and with clients, because it is so important not to have just your mother, your brother, your friend, your cousin talk to you about your situation and what you should or shouldn't do, because number one, they're just going to be either too nice or too harsh. They're always going to view you as little Johnny when you were, 12 years old, if they're a family member, or they're going to remember some experience from some other time in your life when they were, working with you, and they're identified there. But if you have an independent third party who can come in and really listen without all the excess baggage, can make a really big difference. Is that kind of on point? Why don't you tell me what it is that you do?
Well, what it is that I do is I really spend a lot of time with an individual or a company, a group, and help them become self-aware, because communication is all about what you know and how to communicate it. And a lot of people, because we spend so much time trying to figure out what the other person's thinking, we spend very little time understanding how we feel, understanding how we feel, and then learning how to communicate it, because we're either, once we figure out how we feel, we're afraid that we're going to get rejected, or we're going to be told we're wrong, or we're not going to get the support that we need to make decisions the way that we need to make them for ourselves, for our emotional health, for everything, any kind of big decisions that you're making. And so it's really important in communication that you are become very self-aware. So that's kind of what I do is I work with people to be like, okay, how are you seeing the world? Because the way you see the world and the way I see the world are two completely different things. And we need to get on the same page. We need to have the same vocabulary for how we see the world and how we want to connect to it.
Kind of like women are from, what is it? Women are from Mars, and or
Men
women
are
are from Venus and men are from Mars, right? I,
yeah.
yeah. Newsflash: we're different, men versus women. But newsflash: I'm different from other men too, and it's really does have to do with the accumulation of our experiences up to this point.
Hmm.
And while I might not understand what it is that you've been through, gone through, frankly, I don't understand what I've been through, gone through, and how that has shaped my worldview and perspective as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And some people, it takes so long to really kind of piece all of that together.
Yeah, I mean, and rightfully so, right? I mean, you spent a lifetime getting to where you are,
Yep.
and so is the other side, right? So 5 minutes probably is not going to do it, right?
No.
You had an interesting question for me that you wanted to ask me. So what was your question about what I do that you had for me?
Well, how do you help people even start making that first step towards their relationship with their money?
That's actually a big part of the book, which is the namesake of the podcast, Building Your Life. The book is Build a Life, Not a Portfolio. And that it really is the basis for that, because some financial advisors and some counselors will just immediately try and solve the problem that they perceive or that you perceive you have, what we do is we start with, before we ever talk about money, assets, that type of thing, we make sure there's a couple things in place. Number one, we ask you what it is that you want out of life, not what you want to do with your money, not what money means to you, nothing like that, because
Mhm.
frankly, you don't know. And I didn't know, and nobody knows, right? We think we do, but we don't. And they always have an answer. What does money mean to you? They'll have an answer for that. What do you want your best life to be? They'll have an answer for that. And that's never the real answer. I
Yeah.
mean, never. Uh, like 100% of the time. So they'll say something like, and I'm just making this up, I really want a beachfront property in San Antonio, right? Which is beachfront property. But I want beachfront property in South Florida. And that would be my best life. I'd love just to live the rest of my days there. Well, why is that?
Mhm.
And they'll be like, well, because I like the beach. Why do you like the beach? Like the sand, the wind. Okay, well, why is that, do you think? I mean, I asked the why question like a 2 year old. I am a champ. Okay.
Good.
And
Good.
I do warn people, hey, I'm going to be like the 2 year old. You're either going to get super annoyed with me for asking why so many times, or you start to laugh because you'll start to realize that maybe it's hard. The question why gets harder the further down you drill. And the further down you drill, at about number 7, 8, 9, 10 whys, you start to actually get to the real why. And sometimes we're no longer on the beach in South Florida. We might be in the mountains of Tennessee for their best life. Or maybe we're both, right? We've got a place in both places. And that's where we start. Because if you don't know where you're going, it's really hard to look at a map and decide how to get there.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
I mean that's the place we start. So we haven't even talked about money, or is it possible? And sometimes people limit themselves.
Mhm.
I only have $500,000. I only have $1 million. I'll never be able to retire. I hear this a lot, right?
Yeah.
Well, that depends. What is your best life? I mean, if you want a cabin in the woods in Tennessee or West Virginia or someplace like that, that's not nearly as expensive as a place on the beach in South Florida.
Yep.
And so maybe you can retire on that. And maybe if we do some interesting things with how much taxes you're paying in retirement and how much income you're generating that's tax free and all kinds of fun stuff like that, where I get real nerdy, maybe it's even more possible than you thought before.
Mhm.
So, what are the possibilities out there? And then, as we start talking about that, what begins to come out is people's history. And that's where the real relationship with money comes from, I found,
Yeah.
is, what has happened in your life? And it may go clear back to when you were a kid
Mhm.
and how your parents reacted. I often tell the bread bag story. Anybody who's listened to me speak knows the bread bag story, right? So when I was growing up, bread bags, it's the bag that the bread goes in
Yep.
from the grocery store. And when I was growing up, we saved our bread bags. It was just a thing, I'd actually get in trouble if I was caught throwing out a bread bag and it didn't have at least 3 holes in it, right? Because it was useful. Why don't
Yeah.
we throw that away? Well, where did that come from?
Mhm.
Well, my mom's mom grew up during the Great Depression. She saved her bread bags.
Yeah.
My mom saved her bread bags. I saved my bread bags. My wife looked at me like I had 3 heads, like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm hanging up the bread bags after I rinsed them out. We're going to use these again. And when we first got married, we needed to do that anyway. So she said, oh, yeah, good idea. But that was perspective that went 2 generations back.
Yep.
It can go back that far.
Mhm.
I imagine you do some of the same things, right? When you're,
Essentially, yeah, it's spending a lot of time understanding where those beginnings happened and then deciding whether or not, because for me, what I want to focus on specifically is helping people learn how to communicate what they need now so that they are teaching what they want to teach their kids later. Because everything that we're doing is raising, we're raising future adults. And what does that look like? And are we raising them to be super frivolous? Are we raising them to be so controlled by money? Like just where they're unable to trust their partner or have communication or even understand why for them money is important, and budgets and, all of that kind of stuff. That's what I like to focus on because I just feel like they're watching us, like you said, 3 generations later. What have you taught them? And is that the kind of lesson that you want them to learn? Now, we all want them to have good values and not waste and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, they take it the next level sometimes. They either toss aside what you were thinking or they take it and hold on to it just a little bit more. And that's why I think it's important once you understand your relationship with money, you then communicate it to your children and, so they can learn and develop their own relationship with finances.
So is there like a technique or how do you get people to recognize it? How do you get people to not like sort of push back? I don't need that. Is there certainly something that you use or a sort of tip
Well,
or trick of the trade, so to speak?
tricks of the trade.
Yeah.
Um, I just keep asking a lot of questions. That's my biggest thing. If I were to sit down and talk to someone who is just struggling to even make, because I work with a lot of college age students at my day job, and they'll be like, "Oh, I've got to make so much money." Well, okay, why do we have to make so much money? Well, I just, I'm just, my bank's really low. Okay, so what'd you do? And then, just asking these questions. Well, how do you feel about that? Is this the way that you kind of want to live your life? Stressed
Mm.
out all the time? Well, nobody ever really taught me, and I just want to have fun. I get that. I get that. I was a kid too. Are you afraid of what that looks like to have in there? And it's just constant questions, not even the whys, but just like trying to help them open up their eyes to like what they're thinking or why they went out and they made like $500 one night and spent it all the next, and then they're coming in and like, I got to make more money. And so it's just constantly just asking all different kinds of questions. Tell me what you were thinking. That's usually my first one.
Yeah, yeah. What were you thinking and how do you feel now?
Yeah, exactly.
Because ultimately it has to be their decision, right?
Mhm.
And they have to come to the conclusion. You can't, you might see it plain as day. I
Mhm.
often see the problem because I know what to look for. I see it right away. I'm like, yeah, that is so obvious. There's a big like log, sitting on your shoulder. You might want to just take that off. You can't approach it that way, right? The same
No.
way, like in business, when you have a conflict, I often did this when I worked at Morgan Stanley and Nuveen and some of those places. They would bring me in when there was conflict going on, and I tended to be the nice guy. I was not the Wall Street guy that was obnoxious. At least I hope I wasn't. Some people may disagree, but I would just come in and I would be like, "Wow, there's a big log sitting on that guy's shoulder,"
Mhm.
and I'd be like, "Hey, so do you feel a weight on maybe your right shoulder?" And be like, "Oh, yeah, I kind of do." Do you know why that weight's there? I mean, you and eventually they figure it out and they're able to dump that off, and then without that weight, they're able to communicate. I took that analogy way too far, but essentially that's it, right?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, once they're able to figure it out, then they can be proactive. And that's that whole self-awareness. And then they become accountable. Once you figured out what it is that you were holding on to, or ideas or thoughts or feelings or emotions, you can start to become accountable for it. And then we're like, oh, okay, I actually I do have control over this and I can make decisions in the way that I see fit. Um, that's what I like about communication is just getting down to your feelings. Like, how do you feel about this? And then once we establish that, let's talk about what it is that you need and how can I help you?
Yeah, and I often get, especially from the men, right? feelings don't matter. It's logic. Come on, that's just logical. There's a whole chapter. There's a whole chapter in the book Build a Life, Not a Portfolio about how we make decisions. And this is, and you can't prove anything with science, but as close as you can come to proving something with science, it's scientifically proven. Okay. So I can't remember what chapter it is in my own book, but it's I think it's in the how to avoid common mistakes, page 53. But it's all about, and I tell the story of myself because I'll tell on myself. That's some of the best stories of dumb things I've done in my life. And we all make decisions based on emotions, and we'll use logic to justify those decisions.
Yep.
We realize this, then we can laugh at ourselves a little bit and maybe make some progress, right?
Yeah.
And but let's I'm going to do a real quick, maybe left hand turn here on you.
Okay.
I'm going to give you a statistic. This is what we do here on the Building Your Life podcast. We just have conversations, and I never know what's going to happen. So the second most common reason people get divorced is money issues. Now, not lack of money, not too much money, but lack of talking about money. This is the number 2 reason for divorce. You can find that on marriage.com. Why do you think that is? Based on your experience. This is kind of your field, right?
Yeah. Based on my experience, it again obviously comes down to communication, but it can be anything from I met with a couple and one of their biggest issues, of course, was money. They had money, but they were struggling to even communicate. They had budget, they had all this stuff. They were struggling to communicate how to raise their kids with allowances. And that right there is a pain point that they didn't talk about when they made their budgets, or they talked about like money for themselves, but what they forgot about in communication was what do we want to teach our kids? And they were really hot under the collar about it, and I was like, you guys have done great. And again, it wasn't the lack of money, it wasn't that they didn't have a budget, it's that their philosophies and their relationship with money and what they wanted to teach their kids was starting to build a wall. And when I sat down with them, it was only a 45-minute conversation, but it was clear that they had just both been raised so differently. She was given, like, oh, you want that doll? Let's go out and buy it. Like, it's not a big deal. We love you. That's how we want to show you stuff. And he had allowance and chores and everything like that. And he felt that, well, you save so that you can have pride in buying it yourself. So just 2 very different philosophies, but they were really struggling in that. And it was the past, and it was what they wanted to teach. And it was actually kind of funny because she grew up in that was an idea of love and, how that connected her to her family. Well, he felt loved and connected that way because he was taught for him, he was taught in a different way, and he was able to have self-love too, that personal pride. And so they were intertwining the love with money, and we needed to separate that, because I looked at them and I said, do you guys love your kids? Of course you do. That you guys have the same goal. You want to love your kids. You just want to do it in different ways. And that is where we're trying to find the common language. We love our kids. That's it. Now, how do we do it in a way that is both affirming to what her definition of love is and his? And yeah, that was a fun one. I liked that one.
Yeah. Yeah, that and that happens when I sit down with couples, which I do fairly often. And very often it's either the woman or the man, and I'd say it's closer to 50-50 than most people would think. One side really loves the money conversation and is dominant, and the other side agrees with them. Hey, can you just talk with him, or can you just talk with her? And at least for the first conversation, and at least for one conversation during the year, I want both sides of that couple on a Zoom call or in person because I will have so much fun calling them out because I'll see like the dominant one will say, "Oh yeah, we'll do this," and I agree with that, and I'll see the other one kind of shrink back, and they'll be like, they'll roll their eyes. Those of you who are not on YouTube, I'm rolling my eyes right now. They'll roll their eyes, and I'll just say, "Hey, you know what? Over here, she is rolling her eyes. There is something that's bothering her. Come on, let's bring this out, Johnny. What is it that you're thinking? Come on." And of course, they don't want to say anything because they don't want to start a conflict
Hmm.
with their partner. But if you make it a little lighter, and then the other person knows, right? It clicks in their head. They're like, "Oh yeah, I wasn't including him, or I wasn't including her," right? And you get so much further in that way. I don't run personally. It's selfish. I don't run into problems later on
Yep.
because one person passes away and the other one doesn't know what's going on, or they have the divorce type situation, and I don't really know the other side of the equation or what's going on. It saves a lot of headaches for me personally,
Yeah.
and more importantly, it's really healthy for them as a couple to be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a lot of I've had my relationship with money change over the years. I had where I wasn't actively involved in anything. I didn't have any idea what was going on, and my ex-husband put me $25,000 in debt. I had to take that after the divorce, and it was just like, wow, I'm never, going to let that happen again. I want to be involved in what's happening. Just but what I realized was, being afraid of what money can do, and how holding on to it can really affect things too. So I learned lots. I've learned so much with money.
Well, we talk about that a lot on the Building Your Life podcast, and in the book too. We talk about that a lot. About there are some people that hang on to it. There's the savers, and sometimes they can be really miserable. They can, "Oh, look, my bank account's bigger. I'm still miserable." And then you've got the spenders who are like, "Oh, I feel really good. I just spent all that money and I bought that new dress, those new shoes. I bought that new car." If it's a guy, it's usually a new car, which, by the way, a lot more expensive than the new dress or shoes, even if they're Louis
Thank you.
Vuitton, right? Um, and that was our relationship with money. My wife and I is like, "Yeah, I've always wanted a Corvette. I've got the money. I'm buying a Corvette." And my wife, God bless her, was like, "Ahead." And you know what she would do? She's like an angel. She like would buy stuff for the kids. She'd buy stuff for other people. She never bought anything for herself, right? I wanted the Corvette. I wanted the Harley Davidson, so but
Yeah.
a lot more expensive than the gift for the kids. But
Mhm.
it's funny. So if you're ever thinking you're listening to the Building Your Life podcast, you're like, "Oh, that John guy, he must be perfect." That is so not the case, right? I've had a long and sordid relationship with money that has changed over
Mhm.
the years, but still things from my childhood impact the way that I interact with and my relationship with money.
Yeah.
So yeah. Johnny, how is the best way? I mean, you work with individuals, you work with companies
Mhm.
that are in high stress situations that are being held back because they've got a stressful conflict type of situation. You do all sorts of things like that. What's the best way to get in contact with you?
Just on my email, and I try to keep it really simple, johnnywoods@gmail.com.
Johnny
Just,
Woods at
yep.
gmail.com. All right.
Yeah,
I like it.
you
You
can
got
find
right
me
to
on
it.
LinkedIn and all of that, but my email is just the best way. And I love it. I love diving in and starting those conversations of, okay, tell me what's going on. Because not a lot of people like conflict. I don't like being in conflict, but I definitely like helping people through it.
Helping people through it, helping get to some resolution.
Mhm. Yeah, and I like walking through conflict. I'm not a mediator per se, because I think in a mediation you give so that you get, like there's this tug of well, who's going to get what. But I like the conflict, working through conflict, because everyone wins. You've been heard, you've compromised, there's empathy, there's compassion, there's a deeper connection. It's not a give to get kind of situation. So
Really important point. it kind of goes back to the 7 habits or 8 habits, depending on which book you read, right? Of highly effective
Highly
people.
effective people. Mhm.
And it is the win-win. And so often it's so easy to fall into the trap to, win-lose. It's so easy to fall into that. You're looking to help companies,
Yep.
couples, whoever get
Yep.
to the win-win, so both sides win, not a give to get type of
Yeah.
situation, which works everywhere, right? Negotiations, everything
Mhm.
just works better.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just the connection and respect and boundaries. I mean, there's just so much stuff that comes out of good conversations.
And so often we get to the point where we're not having a conversation at all, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, this has been great. We just have just wanted to get you on here, get you out to my audience. I really appreciate your time, Joni. This has been great. I'm going to have all your contact information down in the show notes. So if you want to contact Joni, if you need her help, and don't be afraid to say, I need some help on this. She can get in there and help you out, help you as a couple, as a business, whatever it is. And everyone who normally tunes in already knows the best way to get a hold of me is at guardianrockwealth.com and the contact us section, or text the word life. If you got your phone handy, get out your phone, type in 321-421-5213, text the word life, LIFE. You'll get all of my information, including down at the lower left-hand side on that link, be some time to schedule on my calendar, and I'm happy to talk with anybody, no matter where they are in their financial journey. So again, thanks for tuning into the Building Your Life podcast. Joni, thank you so much. We're going to have to do this again.
Yeah.
All right. We will see everyone next week.